What about that student who fails a bio test simply because they can't read it? For me, this has become the central question of ESL education. Too often, these brilliant students are labeled slow, malfeasant, or behind. How can I instead help that student who knows every part of the cell, who can write verse in their own language that soars above any clunky creation I make in my own language? How can I help them to express what they do know? Let's start at the beginning. A very good place to start. Early summer, Danny. June. My ideas were full of good intention but laced with deficit language. Little did I understand, as Garcia Kleifkin astutely says, that every assessment is an assessment of language. I didn't get it. And thus, I blamed the learner for not doing well, and not the test. I didn't test the test. Then came a bare bones understanding of scaffolding. This is perhaps the most effective and common means of support for English language learners, taking many forms like glossing, diagrams, word banks, translations, and the like. This method of support essentially does some cognitive workload for the student so they can focus on the task at hand. It removes the difficulty of academic language so the learner can focus on the actual educational task at hand. Other students and even educators can also act as scaffolds to remove the difficulty of academic language and also to lower the affective filter. So students can then better practice the language and try to produce an output. But our teaching needs to not stop with just content. Language development occurs best in meaningful contexts. Removed from a classroom in which there is a genuine engagement with language through content, language growth would stymie. In short, we need to include language goals within our curriculum as well as the content goals. That way, as a child's education continues, educators can remove the scaffolds in place and allow the student to access structures they would not have before. See standardized tests. All the while, we must keep in mind past and current theories of language development that include the ideas like the affective filter and a sociocultural approach. However, none of this would work unless it is all done within a theoretical framework of cultural relevance. Language use will not be meaningful until it is culturally relevant, and so there will be no incentive to learn. Supports will not be effective unless they occur in a culturally sensitive way. Students will not want to come to an engaging class unless they care, and this only occurs through cultural relevance. Language learning only happens when the language is used. So if students are not there, they don't care, they won't learn. Cultural relevance is key. All of this comes back to a now approaching June number 2, Danny. As I rework an assessment in a unit in hopes to make it linguistically responsive, I see that very often what I sought to assess was far more about the implicit language use and much less about the content I initially thought, the goals regarding creative writing, of discussing the topics in a text. As a result, for now I've created scaffolds for students, but in the future need to ensure that my assessments are valid, reliable, and practical. A few closing remarks. There are two important practices I see in an effective ESL educator. The first is relationships. To understand what a student needs, every student, not just the English language learners, a teacher needs to know personally where a student is at so they can push every student in an individualized way. Secondly, ESL educators need to reflect on their activities, assessment, and curricula in order to interrogate just what they are actually assessing, just what they are actually teaching, and thus support their English language learners accordingly. And with that, I bid you adieu.